Hello and welcome, friends. I hope everybody's had a great day so far. If you are new here, welcome. And if you're back, welcome back. I greatly appreciate the ongoing support. This is my channel, Dragonsjewel, and I'm Tegan, and I'm just going to get all that wonderful YouTubey stuff out of the way first. If you haven't hit that subscribe button yet, please consider doing so. It's just down below. If you like the content that you see, don't forget to like. And of course, any of that love, comment, suggestions, all those other wonderful things, there's that comment section down there as well. We have just finished up all the Saskatchewan ghost stories for the Ghostly Echoes series. So once again, we are moving further east in Canada and we are starting into Manitoba ghost stories. I hope you guys enjoy the next couple of spooky tales. This story takes place in Winnipeg, Manitoba. Historic Hamilton House. A place where spirits once visited will not apparently always be haunted. Of course, we believers also happen to be slightly timid folk. Must not take too much comfort from that fact that the reverse implication could also be true. Just because you are happily living in an unhaunted home today is no guarantee that it'll always be a ghost-free zone. The former home of Dr. T.G. Hamilton at Henderson Highway and Macintosh Avenue in Winnipeg is an excellent example of a house with a past that included ghostly guests, but a present that is decidedly quiet. The stately old home has long since been subdivided so that it now contains apartments and a shop called the Olive Branch. According to the people associated with the store, the building is only haunted by the legends and rumors that continue to swirl around the place. The Olive Branch association with the Mennonite Church might, of course, have something to do with this formerly held conviction. No one with any knowledge of the building's history could reasonably deny that at one time, at least, from the end of World War I until the mid-1930s, a veritable smorgasbord of paranormal activity took place in the Hamilton home. In addition to his position as a highly esteemed Elmwood area physician, Dr. Hamilton, who also served as president of the Manitoba Medical Association for a time, was considered a pivotal member of the local Presbyterian Church and was an influential provincial politician. Hamilton's progressive beliefs led him to back some highly contentious and liberal bills, in one case going as far as supporting the radical premise that women should be allowed to vote. Understandably, Hamilton was considered to have been politically precarious, but he carried his unconventional philosophies even further into the paranormal. Author John Robert Colombo, in his book Mysterious Canada, states that Hamilton could well be considered the most important psychical researcher Canada has ever known. Hamilton was fascinated by the world of the spirits and was determined to discover whether or not communication between the realm of the living and that of the deceased was possible towards this end. Towards this end, he held many seances and other spiritual gatherings in his home. His remarkable successes drew national and eventually worldwide attention. To some degree, this recognition was the result of timing. Interest in things paranormal had suddenly swept the world. Everyone, it seemed, wanted to communicate with the dead. Many, including those attending the Hamilton seances, did so through table tipping, a paranormal activity that at the time was considered to be little more than a parlor game. Through table tipping, communication from the other side was accomplished. By seating a group of people in a circle and having them place their hands on a small table that had been situated in their midst. Placing their hands on top of the table served the dual purpose of accounting for everyone's hands, thereby ruling out sleight of hand, and also on concentrating the participants' energy. Once they were so arranged, the group would focus on contacting spirits, and they often succeeded, presumably responding to the same mysterious force that drives the planchette on a Ouija board. The host's otherwise standard table would tip. In response to a system predetermined by the people attending, spirits would lift the table a few centimeters off the floor, angled slightly, and with one or two legs, tap or knock on the floor. In its simplest terms, one knock would usually represent a positive answer, two a negative reply. Predictability. After some success with this method, participants wanted more detailed communication with the entities. To answer this demand, a system was developed where one tap stood for the letter A, two for B, and so on. Anyone involved in such a ritual must have hoped the spirit they contacted had not been a linguist in life. Sitting through too many words like Zymergy or even wizard could strain the most patient person's resources. Perhaps this communication is part of the reason table tipping became accepted as a form of entertainment. Rather than spending a social evening dancing, telling stories, or playing cards with friends, people invited each other into their homes for the express purpose of attempting to contact spirits. These types of spiritual get-togethers were so widely accepted that even Canada's Prime Minister at the time, William Lyon Mackenzie King, 1874 to 1950, frequently contacted the ghosts of his loved ones. It is probably a blessing that Canadians had been unaware their country was being led by a man who not only communicated regularly with his dead dog, but was also privy to direction from biblical characters. King was Prime Minister for 3 terms, 1921 to 26, 1926 to 30, and 1935 to 48. Dr. Hamilton once hosted a visit from Prime Minister King, who was most impressed with the researcher's work and methods. Because Dr. Hamilton's background was in medicine, he strove to make his pursuit of the paranormal as scientific as he could. Towards this end, whenever possible, Hamilton used the technology of the day, specifically photography. His photographic efforts were dramatically rewarded with some very provocative photos. These pictures included images of spirits who had apparently been called forth by the living participants involved in the Hamilton House seances. News of Dr. Hamilton's successes at summoning spirits soon spread and actually led him to discontinuing the sessions out of concern for his medical practice. Despite the acceptance of spiritualism during that era, he worried that his journeys into the world of the ocelot would diminish his role as a respected healer. His concerns and the suspicion of his experiments turned out to be short-lived. In January 1923, friends convinced the man to give table tipping another try. At that session, he received a clear message of encouragement from whatever force was communicating. The table levitated, tilted, and knocked against the floor in a systematic, organized, and apparently understood way. The spirits had spoken. It was clear to Hamilton and his friends that the spirits wanted Hamilton to continue his investigations. He did continue, finding that his popularity as a physician actually grew from his spiritual investigations. In addition, people considered him an expert in the field of the paranormal, and Hamilton became very much in demand as a lecturer. There is great justification for this recognition, if only based on the man's successes, but it was his methods that were even more impressive. His scrupulous research is detailed in a book he wrote entitled Intention and Survival. The documentation of a seance held in the early part of the 1930s demonstrates the strictly controlled circumstances under which these sessions were conducted. There is an affidavit signed by an uninvolved observer, a respected lawyer named Isaac Blabo. The man described in detail not only the session and his reason for involvement, but also the complicated procedures used to eliminate the possibility of a session's being a hoax. Blabo's involvement had been requested by a spirit named Walter. This ghost had been contacted in a previous session and had specified who he wanted as an objective observer to his reappearance. The report Pip Blabo penned about the seance went on for more than 1,000 words, most of which attested to the sophisticated measures taken to ensure the legitimacy of the spiritual contact. Pip Blabo described how the room where the seance was to be held had been thoroughly searched for possible aids to a hoax. The room had then been double locked and actually sealed by means of knotted, unbroken pieces of string with stickers adhered to them. These stickers were signed by 2 respective members of the community, proving that the room had been secured. As Pip Blabo pointed out in his writing, even if there had been no locks on the door, the fact that the seals remained intact proved the room hadn't been entered since it had last been examined. Despite this assurance, Pip Blabo thoroughly searched the room himself, including all the photographic equipment set up to hopefully record the appearance of an apparition. Once all of this was accomplished, Pip Blabo searched each man before allowing anyone to enter the recently opened room. None of the participants were allowed to enter with their jackets on or even their shirt sleeves rolled down. Everything that the man carried into the room with them were itemized, although these objects amounted to little more than cigarette lighters and coins. Having assured himself that neither the room nor any of the participants were equipped to perpetrate a sham, Pip Blabo let the seance begin. Walter the Spirit, who had requested that Pip Blabo attend the session, made his presence known almost immediately, as Walter's stated purpose was only to substantiate his ghostly existence. He provided such proof without delay. Once all the men around the table were holding hands, Walter asked that Pip Blabo join hands with the medium in attendance. The medium was already holding Dr. Hamilton's hand and a Mr. Cross's left hand. Pip Blabo's hands were then placed on top of the other 2. The men designated as the photographer in the group took a series of photos immediately after those instructions were followed. After the seance, Pip Blabo accompanied Hamilton with the photographic plates to a dark room where they stayed until the developing process had been completed. The pictures turned out even better than he had hoped. All the people at the seance photographed well, even Walter. Yes, much to everyone's satisfaction, there was clearly the image of an extra person in each of the photographs. By combining his own spiritual power with today's technology, Walter the Ghost had managed to prove his very existence. The controlled conditions under which this experiment was conducted certainly make its integrity convincing. The success also encouraged the group to continue its work and to regularly incorporate cameras into the sessions. The hundreds of photos taken during these seances are now part of the University of Manitoba's archival collections. Some photographs show tables flying through the air, and others illustrate the phenomenon as ectoplasm or teloplasm. Both words define a white fluid that traditionally manifests itself around a medium's head. This material occasionally contained likeness of whatever spirit had been summoned by those involved in the seance. In short, Dr. Hamilton's success in the field of paranormal investigation were astounding. As recently as 40 years ago, the Free Press ran a 13-part series written by Dr. Hamilton's daughter about his pioneering work. In its introduction, the newspaper implied that the series would be something of a public service, providing background information about the field of paranormal. As the writer of the January 18, 1958 introduction put it, the average reader without special training or experience in the subject is likely to find himself lacking any satisfactory criterion to distinguish the work of value from what may indeed be nothing more than self-deception or even fraud. Today's reader can extrapolate from those mildly condescending statements, and from the fact that the newspaper was running such a long series of articles, that interest in spiritualism was by the late 1950s high once again. Interest had died down during the Great Depression. The articles described how a woman named Mary M. had frequently acted as the medium for seances, held at Hamilton's house. Only in trance, Mary M. became Dawn, a personality possessing abilities well beyond Mary's scope. The spirit named Walter often spoke through Dawn during these sessions, but others from beyond also spoke through the psychic. Frederick Myers, a scholar and paranormal pioneer who worked in Britain until his death in 1901, visited, as did Robert Louis Stevenson, 1850-94. The latter identified himself as only one of the writers in the spirit world who was intent on teaching those on the physical plane that there is not only survival after death, but the potential for communication between the two planes. Another of the presences to identify itself was that of W.T. Stead. This man had been a renowned psychic investigator who had published a book of automatic writing, a phenomenon that occurs when the writer, often a medium, is in a trance. The information that is automatically written in this altered state is often beyond the knowledge of the person writing, and is usually considered to be from a spirit or other supernatural being. Sadly, Stead's research and life were cut short by his death on April 14, 1912, when the luxury liner Titanic sank. He, too, wanted to assure all of those involved that the loss of the physical body did not mark the end of the spirit's life. Some spirits kept their anonymity, but gave Dawn and others specific instructions on how to further communicate. One of those spirits requested that Dawn be given a pen and paper for her the next session so that he might dictate a message through her. When she was properly equipped, the woman began a session of her automatic writing, in which the spirit working through her described the world beyond as being quite similar to the world of the living. The presence informed those people attending the spirit world is the abode of undeveloped spirits, those who have not long left the body, and those who, by law of the spirit life, have not risen to higher spheres. The entity went on to describe how he had arrived at his current plane of existence. I was taken into a mist like a great cloud which encircled me, much to the disappointed of anybody looking forward to purer times in the great beyond, the spirit reported. There is much superstition and bigotry on the subject of spirit communion among spirits as among those in the flesh. The entities also communicated with the group by drawing likenesses of the spirits. Once transformed from Mary to Dawn by way of a trance, the medium had an admirable artistic bent and frequently drew a portrait of the person communicating with her. By the mid-1930s, much of the interest in the phenomenon had faded. The world was suffering a most severe economic downturn. The Great Depression had begun. People deeply concerned with how to feed their families had little interest in the paranormal. Coincidentally, Dr. Hamilton died in the spring of 1935. He did not live to see a resurge of interest in the subject he had found so intriguing, and in which he had conducted so many carefully documented and controlled experiments. Those who had been closest to Dr. Hamilton and his work continued to hold seances after the man's death. Not surprisingly, the ghost of the doctor even attended a few of those sessions himself. The August 12, 1938 edition of the Free Press ran a small article about a former political colleague of Hamilton's who was attempting to communicate with spirits when he heard a familiar voice. "Is that you?" the man inquired. Hamilton assured his former associate that it was, and that he was well and accompanied by author Sir Arthur Conan Doyle. This news was not startling to anyone who had known Hamilton, for the author of Sherlock Holmes stories had an enthusiastic interest in the supernatural, and the two men had known and respected each other in life. Dr. Hamilton, Winnipeg's physician, politician, and paranormal investigator, was clearly a man ahead of his time. It is easy to imagine how he would not only enjoy, but contribute to today's growing collection of knowledge about the supernatural world. Considering what a rich venue for ghostly activity Hamilton's house once was, I was disappointed to learn today that it is quiet, apparently devoid of spirits. Perhaps that emptiness, however, is only because most of the time there is no one in the house to beckon the spirits. A conversation with local psychic Shelley O'Day confirmed this possibility for me. O'Day had visited Hamilton House at the invitation of Dr. Hamilton's daughter, Margaret Hamilton Buck. Miss O'Day recalled perceiving the image of a cello between herself and her hostess. When she mentioned this to the former Miss Hamilton, the woman was not at all surprised. Although there hadn't been a cello in the house for years, her deceased brother had played the instrument. Perhaps he's just waiting for some other spirits that once populated his family home to return and visit into eternity. This story takes place in Winnipeg, Manitoba. Is there or isn't there? The Walker Theatre is not haunted. That sort of reply to a question doesn't allow a lot of room for negotiation. It did, however, provoke my curiosity about the old place even further, because I'd been given to understand that the haunting of the Walker Theatre was a widely accepted phenomenon. Being completely unprepared for the denial I received, having been immediately and effectively silenced. Worse, I was sure that my local lack of response to the theatre's representative's assertion would effectively destroy any hope of obtaining more information. Much to my delight, however, the reverse proved to be true. The woman who had answered my phone call seemed to take my silence as a challenge to the veracity of her claim, and she launched into a defense of her statement. This place isn't haunted. That's just a joke. We kid about there being a ghost here. Whenever a door slams and there's been no one around it, or when things go missing for no reason, we just say, oh, it must be the ghost. While listening to her and trying to compose myself to continue the conversation, I must admit a line from Hamlet did come to mind. Much like the Prince of Denmark, I couldn't help but think, the lady doth protest too much. First of all, if the place wasn't haunted, why would doors unexpectedly slam and things mysteriously go missing? And secondly, why would someone be so defensive if there had never been any indication that there was a ghost in the theater? The telephone conversation lasted mere seconds from that point, but afterward we said goodbye. I realized that in a backward sort of way it had accomplished my purpose. I certainly had one take, and an interesting one at that, on the ghost at the Walker Theatre. Now all I had to do was ferret out proponents of the other side of the issue. Fortunately, that didn't prove to be too difficult. My next call was to the library at the Winnipeg Sun. The librarian recalled that the paper had run articles about a ghost at the Walker Theatre, and better yet, the reporter who covered the stories was still an employee, so the man kindly redirected my call to her. I had quite an experience there, acknowledged longtime Sun reporter Nomi Lakritz. To me, this comment did not sound like the reaction one would have expected from a seasoned newspaper journalist to an ordinary assignment. After listening to the woman describe her investigation, I realized the assignment had most assuredly not been ordinary, but rather extraordinary. In every sense of the word, the strangest assignment I've had in nearly a decade working for the Winnipeg Sun was how she described it. The stagehands at the Walker had talked about ghosts. My editor originally had it planned that I would stay overnight in the theater, she recalled. Fortunately for Naomi's nerves, that version of the plan didn't work out. I didn't like that idea, but then the people at the theater said that wouldn't work anyway because of their motion detectors. If their security system wasn't turned on, including the motion detectors, then their insurance company wouldn't cover them if anything happened. Naomi and her editor moved right along to Plan B. I had a psychic, Shelley O'Day, go in with me, and we took a tape recorder. First, we went right up to what they call the gods, as high up as you can go in the theater. We set up a tape recorder there and just waited for about half an hour. We didn't hear anything. Then we moved to what they called the fly gallery, where all the ropes for props and curtains hang. Shelley said she could feel cold currents, but I told her it was just a fan. We were there about 30 minutes. There was no one else in the auditorium part of the theater except us. There were a couple of people in the box office area. No one came near us the whole time. When we played that tape back, I couldn't believe that was what was recorded on there. There was loud banging sounds and hammering. Then there were footsteps walking across the floor to the tape recorder and away from it. Then there were more footsteps, and it sounded like someone whispered, "Please," into the tape recorder. Naomi's description of the contradiction between the silence she and Shelley had thought they'd been surrounded by, and the noises that the tape machine beside them had picked up, was definitely indicative of at least one presence. She added what was stranger still about the tape was that sometimes when you played it, the sounds were on it. Other times when you played it, the tape was blank. Wanting to verify that what she experienced wasn't a prank, Naomi questioned well-known ghost buff Roy Bauer. He knows Shelley O'Day, knows of her remarkable talents as a psychic, as well as her definitive limitations as a technician. I asked Roy if Shelley could somehow have set this whole thing with the tape recorder up. He told me not a chance. He said Shelley can't even program her own VCR. Clearly his message was that it would have been completely unimaginable for Shelley O'Day to have purposely created the bizarre tape. I wondered what the experience had been like from Shelley's perspective. As a psychic who is frequently called upon to determine whether or not a building is haunted, she was, of course, more matter-of-fact about the experience. On the tape, you could hear someone pacing and out of breath. The floor on which they were pacing seemed like steel. We did get the spirits on tape. The spirit draws on my energy to project on the tape. I picked some different people up when I was first in the theater. All of this certainly served to confirm the stagehands' rather vague reports of feeling stared at when they knew they were alone, or feeling a presence when there was no one visible near them. Personnel also reported hearing footsteps when there was no physical way that such a sound could be made. It's a fair guess that the ghost was a theater buff because employee Wayne Jackson reported that, at the end of a performance, I almost hear people clapping up there, an unoccupied tier of seats. But it's always during an opera or something like that. I don't think ghosts appreciate rock and roll. Tom Cochrane's music is considerably more contemporary than the ghosts likely are, which is perhaps why the spirits gave security guard Jim St. Louis such a hard time. St. Louis was to provide security for the Canadian musicians' equipment while it was being stored overnight after Cochrane's concert at the Grey Cup game in Winnipeg. St. Louis was quoted in an interview with the Winnipeg Sun as saying, "I made a sweep of the theater at 3 a.m. with 2 dogs and it was empty. But it was like someone was in there. I thought someone's now in the theater, but no one was there, for sure." In addition, he felt someone looking at me in the basement all the time. Oh, if you've been there, you would have ran out. St. Louis had received specific orders to close the 2 steel doors on each side of the fly gallery that sits high above the stage. I couldn't close the door. It was too heavy. It must weigh a couple of 100 pounds, so I left it. Then I got downstairs again and heard a big slam. I ran back up there and the door was closed. At least now the doors that were supposed to be closed were. However, St. Louis certainly wasn't feeling any more comfortable. As he patrolled the dressing room area, he noted that certain doors he'd been told had to stay open were closed. The bathroom doors up there have to be kept open because it's not heated, and they don't want the pipes to freeze. The door is propped open with a wedge of wood. Then you make a round, and every time the door is closed. The wood's been kicked aside, but no one's been up there. There's a total of 6 doors where this happens. The man was accompanied by his dogs, whom he described as usually outgoing dogs, and they'll wander through whatever place I'm working. But they hang around me all night. They went crazy barking. When the doors started slamming, Boxer Dog was going nuts, barking. The dogs also refused to accompany their owner when he went to the 4th floor of the theater, which was uncharacteristic of them. Why would the spectacular Walker Theater be haunted? After all, it wasn't like the Manitoba Theater Center, where there was a clear-cut explanation for the ghost. Winnipegger Chris Rekakowski explained in his book Unnatural History that theater ghosts are quite common. Wayne Jackson, a former Walker Theater house manager, was quoted in The Sun as saying, "There's a lot of talk in theaters about phantoms. I've been in theaters for many years and strange things happen." Only Flyman Kenny Jackson was willing to take a stab at whom 1 or 2 of the presences might be. He connected a plaque to the theater lobby to the hauntings. It was a memorial to the husband and wife acting team of Lawrence Irving and Mabel Hackney. They performed at the Walker on May 23, 1914, and less than a week later perished with 1,020 others when the SS Empress of Ireland sank in the Gulf of St. Lawrence. "You kind of wonder," Kenny told a reporter. He is also one of the Walker employees who will admit to having witnessed some eerie things at Walker. There might be some debate about whether the theater is haunted, and if it is, then by whom. But there is no doubt of the grand old lady's splendor. Constructed in 1907, the Walker was later called one of the finest on the American continent. During its heyday, the theater posted most of the Vaudeville's big names: Charlie Chaplin, Bob Hope, Groucho, Marx, Sophie Tucker, Jimmy Durante, and Georgie Jessel. All strutted their stuff across the theater's impressive stage. Until the early 1930s, it was a proud and grand entertainment hall. With the Depression, however, no one had any money for luxuries such as shows, and the place fell on hard times. It was eventually seized for back taxes before reopening as a cinema. This incarnation lasted until 1991, when the hall, restored to its original glory, became a home for live entertainment once again. It's hoped that the spirits of the place are pleased with what their longtime home has become, even if some who work there don't recognize their ghostly existence. Of course, if the person who answered my call truly believes that there are no spirits at the Walker, I wondered why the staff makes a habit of leaving the ghost lamp on. This story takes place in South Central Manitoba. Murray the Ghost. Collecting ghost stories can occasionally be frustrating. Often it seems just when you think you've stumbled upon an answer you've been searching for, you also turn up another question. Why is one particular place haunted, and yet another seemingly not? Why does one person's spirit live on, while another soul might never be heard from again? In the following story, it's tempting to think that there's a fairly obvious answer to both those questions. What is now the administration building for the University of Manitoba's Delta Marshfield Station was originally a hunting lodge. As far back as the Dirty 30s, wealthy hunters from all over the world traveled to the south shore of Lake Manitoba to stay at Millard Lodge. Clark Gable and Cary Grant were 2 celebrities who availed themselves to both the duck hunting and the hospitality associated with the privately run lodge. Mallard's lodge caretaker, Murray, was one of those on hand to cater to the wealthy gentleman's every need. Apparently Murray loved his job, and for more than 30 years did it well. Of course, that was a long time ago, and Murray's been dead for years by now. Despite the indisputable fact of his passing, there continues to be strong indications that the former caretaker remains in residence, working away into eternity. Russ Mead, who has worked as the Delta Marsh station manager since the mid-1980s, has always been aware of a ghostly presence in the lodge. "Ah, yes, Murray the ghost," Russ Mead said with a chuckle. "When I called in the spring of 1997 to ask him about the resident entity, he hasn't been active too much lately, and that's a little surprising because I was here alone a lot with the flooding and all. Of course, maybe I was just too zonked and tired to be able to detect him under those circumstances. But apparently we do have a bona fide ghost here. He's a friendly ghost. Murray the caretaker. He used to be a lot more active than he is now. If you were able to trace the ghost history of this place, you'd find he was around most when there was a lot of people here. When this place was first a field station, there were lots of reports of Murray's activities. He would open and close doors, turn on faucets and lights. Just before that, the place had been nearly abandoned for a while. To prove his point about Murray's preferring to show off when only a few people are around to witness his hijinks, Russ related that over a previous August long weekend, a man and his girlfriend had stayed at the station alone. The ghost was there. He did lots. The girl saw his figure at a window, and he also rang the bell, Russ recalled, before explaining that causing the station bell to ring is no simple feat. It's on a wire pole, and it takes quite a bit to ring it. As a biological field station, the Delta Marsh is often a temporary home to scientists. Those trained to observe and record impartially are generally not folks given to flights of fancy. Despite this, a graduate science student named Michael Goodyear had an experience he'll likely never forget. Mead began relating the student's experience by explaining what he knew of Goodyear. He was a meticulous kind of guy, not a goofball at all. He'd never be one to play a practical joke. Having thus set the tone of a credible report, the station manager went on to relate that Michael Goodyear had the closest encounter of anyone. He was in his bunk, unable to sleep. He had a flashlight with him, and the first thing he noticed that it had been moved. Then he saw a skull at the end of his bed. The figure was draped. It rose up and floated over him. Given that Goodyear was at the station to gain experience, his stay certainly served its purpose. It would be interesting to know whether this morning's visit from the apparition spurred any sudden interest in the additional fields of research. After chatting about Murray and the haunted lodge for a few minutes, the personable Russ Mead paused for a moment before adding, "I kind of wondered if Murray had been around recently, because the thermostat was acting strangely, but all I did was reprogram it. Maybe he could have caused that, I don't know." Given the attraction of ghosts to things electric and electronic, it's quite possible that Murray did cause the glitch, although of course we'll never really know. What we probably can surmise accurately is that Murray is the reason the former Mallard Lodge is haunted. It would appear that this story is a case of the deceased not being aware he's dead, and it seems a safe bet that the University of Manitoba Research Station at Delta Marsh will remain haunted as long as Murray continues to think he's still alive.